You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there is a lot to get to today. I know I always say that, but today it's really true because the deadline for the fifth-year options for the 2017 NFL Draft Class is today. As it stands right now, we know the fate of 31 of those 32 first-rounders. The only one that we don't know yet is Malik Hooker. So I will try to stay abreast of that situation. If it breaks when I'm still recording, I'll talk about it. If it breaks when I'm in the edit or after the show is posted, I'll talk about it tomorrow. Obviously, Don Shula passed away today, so I'm going to talk about that. Andy Dalton getting signed by the Cowboys, really weird, but when I said there's a lot to get to, I truly meant there's a lot to get to. No trifecta today. In fact, I have some more segments for the trifecta in the hopper. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But I want to start with the fifth-year options. Now, I'm not going to talk about every decision in depth, because a lot of them were really easy. I'm going to go through them in blocks. Because 95% of these teams got it right. Some of them got it wrong, but most of them got it right. I'm sorry, I'm out of breath. I literally just ran down my stairs to tell my father that Don Shula died. Damn, I just saw that as I was scrolling through Twitter to look at Malik Hooker stories. Oh my goodness. Was not expecting to talk about Don Shula today, I can tell you that. But he'll come second. The first three decisions for fifth-year options were really easy. Myles Garrett's being exercised, and Mitchell Trubisky and Solomon Thomas's being declined. Myles Garrett, even though he's a little bit of a head case, is still a great football player. You have to keep him around for as long as possible if you're the Browns. If it gets to the point where the situation is untenable, then, yeah, part ways. But we're not there yet. You've got to give this new regime a chance to work with these enigmatic personalities in Garrett and Beckham and Mayfield. Here's hoping it works. The talent is there. The coach just needs to put it all together. Mitchell Trubisky's option being declined caught some people by surprise. Quite frankly, I knew it was going to be declined. Trubisky's been a massive bust. Mitchell Trubisky is probably the biggest bust we've had at quarterback since RG3. And even then, that wasn't RG3's fault. That was the Shanahans mismanaging his injury. I mean, 50 years from now, when we're looking back at the 2017 NFL Draft, there are going to be a lot of people scratching their heads how Patrick Mahomes went 8 picks after Mitchell Trubisky. And when you factor in the fact that Ryan Pace traded up to get Trubisky just makes a bad pick that much worse. Solomon Thomas has been absolutely dreadful since coming into the league. It's funny, everyone was praising John Lynch for trading down one spot and still getting the guy that he wanted in Thomas. Well, that trade didn't work out for anyone. Trubisky's a bust and Thomas is a bust. This guy has done nothing since entering the NFL. And you take a look at all those defensive linemen that the Niners picked high: Armstead, Buckner, Thomas, Bosa, Kinlaw. Look, you hit a home run with Bosa. Kinlaw is going to be a really, really good player in this league for a long time. And Arik Armstead is a beast. But when you whiff on a third overall pick, and you factor in some of the guys that were taken behind Thomas, that's not a good look for Lynch. Also, here's a fun fact about that trade. The Niners, as part of the package to trade down, got the 67th overall pick in 2017. The Niners didn't use it, though. They traded it to the New Orleans Saints in exchange for a 7th round pick that year and a 2nd round pick next year. You know who the Saints took with that pick? Alvin Kamara. The Niners got the pick that eventually became Alvin Kamara in the Mitchell Trubisky trade. If the Niners had taken Kamara, oh man, Pace is out of a job now. And here's another interesting Alvin Kamara story. Supposedly Todd Bowles wanted the Jets to take Kamara, but Mike Maccagnan evidently knew better. I don't know how true that is. It's just an interesting anecdote. Leonard Fournette's option got declined, and I'm really surprised about that. This is a guy who has been a 1,000-yard back 2 of his 3 years in the league, and the year that he wasn't, his sophomore year, 2018, he got hurt and missed half the season. See, here's the problem with tanking. You get so obsessed with gutting your roster that you lose really good football players that you can use long term. You want to tell me you don't want to pay a running back that type of money? Then you know what? Don't take Fournette in the first place. See, this is my problem with the don't pay running backs logic. When you find a good one, you just let him walk. And then you hope to find another good one. And then the cycle repeats itself. Well, it doesn't work that way. At the end of the day, when you have one of the best young running backs in the NFL in Leonard Fournette, you have to pay him. And now this guy is going to be a very highly coveted free agent next year. I could very easily see him getting a big contract in free agency. I don't care that he's a running back. He'll be 26 by the time he hits free agency. If he's a 1,000-yard back again, he's gonna get paid. I weep for you, Jaguars fans. I really, really do. This has been a collapse of epic proportions. Corey Davis's option got declined. No big surprise there. Davis hasn't set the world on fire since going to the Titans. I hated that pick at the time. I'm looking pretty smart right about now. Davis has had flashes where he's looked really good, but he's never been able to put it all together. At the end of the day, there's no excuse for you to only have 6 touchdowns in 3 seasons. The catch totals are nice. The receiving yards is nice. The yards per catch is nice, but the 6 touchdowns, you can't get around that. There's a reason that the Titans took A.J. Brown high 2 drafts ago. Jamal Adams had his option exercised. No-brainer. Best strong safety in the league. I'm not going to go into my strong safety spiel again. All I'm going to say is the Jets would be idiots not to exercise his option, but this doesn't mean that they still can't trade him. Mike Williams was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. I remember being stunned when he wasn't the first wide receiver off the board. I mean, this is a guy who led the NFL in yards per catches last year. 20.4. Now, I don't like that he only had 2 touchdowns, but at the end of the day, when you're a 1,000-yard receiver, you're doing something right. Also, 2 years ago, he caught 10 touchdowns. He's shown that he can do it. The Chargers just have to get him the ball more when they're at goal-to-go situations. Christian McCaffrey's a no-brainer. He's the whole Carolina Panthers franchise at this point. All due respect to Teddy Bridgewater and Derek Brown, but it's McCaffrey. It's not Matt Rule. It's Christian McCaffrey. John Ross is kind of interesting. I understand the logic behind not exercising his option. It's guaranteed money, and this is a guy who's never played a full season before. But don't you get the sense that there's just a lot of talent there when you watch him? Don't you get the sense that if he could just stay healthy, he'd be really darn good? Like, think about this wide receiver core for a minute. A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, and John Ross. That sounds pretty darn good to me. Joe Burrow would be having field days. I understand the decision to not exercise his option, but Ross has a ton of talent. I'd like to see him put it all together. I think he can. He just has to stay healthy. Patrick Mahomes, Marshawn Lattimore, and Deshaun Watson all had their options exercised. Those were probably the easiest decisions that those franchises have ever made. Not going to spend any time on that. I'll move on to Hassan Reddick. He had his option declined. Of course he did. Reddick has been a terrible bust since entering the NFL. This is a guy who just consistently has always looked lost. His best season came in 2018 when he had a 60.8 overall grade according to Pro Football Focus. That's not very good for the 13th overall pick. Good decision by the Cardinals. Although it should worry them that they picked back-to-back busts in Reddick and Rosen. Rosen still has talent. I'd like to see him get an opportunity somewhere. God only knows where that place is, whether it's the Patriots or the Jaguars. Those are the only quarterback-needy teams right now. It's really a shame what's happened to Josh Rosen. It just is. He is a bust as of right now, but just give him the opportunity to start, put a solid offensive line around him, get him some weapons, and I think he can turn into a really good quarterback. Unfortunately, though, I don't think he's ever going to get that opportunity. Derek Barnett had his option exercised. And I'm torn on this one. This is a guy who started a bunch of games last year, didn't set the world on fire, 59.2 overall grade, according to Pro Football Focus, played well in the wildcard game, played well in 2017 also, but he's never been able to stay healthy for a full season. He's coming off a really bad regular season. I understand why the Eagles did it. Barnett has talent. Honestly, I'm torn on it. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'll skip over Malik Hooker because no decision has been made, and I'll move over to Marlon Humphrey. Typical Baltimore Ravens, you pick a defensive player high in the draft and he works out. Humphrey has been really good ever since entering the NFL. No-brainer to exercise his option. Jonathan Allen had his option exercised. I remember being really high on Allen in 2017. I was stunned when he slipped to 17. I thought the Redskins hit a home run in that draft. While Allen hasn't set the world on fire, he's shown talent. He's not great, but he's not terrible. He's just good. It's a good decision to keep him around, especially with Ron Rivera coming in. I'm excited to see what he can do in that system. Adoree Jackson has been great ever since entering the league. I remember Brandon Johnson, one of my former co-hosts at Beyond the Game, being really, really high on him. And he made Brandon look really smart. This guy has never had a Pro Football Focus grade worse than 73. And if you watched him in the playoffs, you could see that he didn't let the bright lights get to him. Now, his rookie year, he did, but that's to be expected. Last year, he looked really darn good. Absolute no-brainer by the Titans. O.J. Howard is really interesting to me. In 2017, I wanted the Jets to draft him desperately. Now, when Jamal Adams slipped to him, it was the right decision to take Adams. But I remember saying on Beyond the Game that the Jets still needed a tight end. O.J. Howard is going to have a great career, while Adams is going to have an excellent career. The Jets are going to regret missing on a great tight end. And Howard has been good, but he's never been great. Last year, he was expected to take a big jump forward, and he didn't. He fell flat. And then the Buccaneers traded for Rob Gronkowski. I don't understand why the Buccaneers exercised his option, unless they think that's going to give him more trade value. I don't know what team needs him. I don't know what team needs a tight end right now. You missed your opportunity to trade him. You have to wait until training camp or the preseason for a tight end to go down. And then that team gets desperate and trades for Howard. I don't like this decision by the Buccaneers. I'd rather they just move on from him entirely. Garrett Bowles is really interesting. This is a guy who has never had a Pro Football Focus grade worse than 72.8. He's one of the most underrated players in the NFL. And the Broncos decline his option? Unless they're working on an extension, and this is part of it, this makes no sense. You can give Drew Lock all the weapons in the world. It means nothing if he doesn't have time to throw the ball. Garrett Bowles is one of the best left tackles in the NFL. I understand that there are some Broncos fans that aren't crazy about him, but I really like this kid. I'm stunned that the Broncos moved on from him. Jarrad Davis was an easy decision to have his option declined. He's been a huge bust ever since entering the league out of Florida. Has never had a Pro Football Focus grade better than 52.8, and that was his rookie year. Every year he's gotten worse. Major bust. Charles Harris has already been traded. He wasn't going to have his fifth-year option exercised, so it's not worth talking about that much. Evan Engram is kind of interesting. Of course, he should have gotten his option exercised. That was the right decision by the Giants. But don't you get the sense that you just want him to do more? We know he's good. He's a good tight end. We don't know if he's great. First up, he has to stay healthy. He's never started more than 11 games. And in that year that he started 11 games, it was his rookie year. And he looked like he was going to be the next Jeremy Shockey or Mark Bavaro. Instead, it seems like he's just topping out at good. He can be better. You see it. He just has to stay healthy. It's the right decision to exercise his fifth-year option. He just needs to reach his full potential. It's just that simple. Gareon Conley came into the league under a big cloud. There was a rape allegation against him late in the draft process. It knocked him down some boards. He should have been taken in the top 20. Easy. Even top 15 wouldn't have been a reach. But obviously, he slipped to 24. A grand jury chose not to charge Conley, and he was able to get on with his life. I really like Gareon Conley. Like, he's a good player. He's not great. He's gotten worse every year he's been in the league. The Raiders ended up trading him to the Texans for a third-round pick. You couldn't begrudge that trade for the Raiders. Conley seemed like he had topped out. But then with the Texans, he found some new life. Romeo Crennel has done a great job working with him. I'd have liked to have seen Conley stick around for a couple more years with the Texans. I'm really surprised that they declined his option. Jabril Peppers had to get his option exercised. When you're the player that gets traded for Odell Beckham, you cannot afford to miss on that. Just as Dave Gettleman cannot afford to miss on Dexter Lawrence and O'Shane Ximines, he can't afford to miss on Jabril Peppers. I like Peppers a lot. I'm glad he had his option exercised. He's a good player. It was the right decision by the Giants. Takk McKinley having his option declined really surprised me. You know, this is a guy who, while he's never been a game wrecker, he's always been really good. Maybe you want more from that as a first rounder, but you could do a lot worse than Takk McKinley. I'm stunned that the Falcons declined his option. Just another bad decision by Dan Quinn. I hate Dan Quinn. I don't know how he still has a job. He's been on the hot seat for a while. Just can him now. The Falcons aren't going to get any better with him. He still hasn't gotten over 28-3. Tre'Davious White had his option exercised. In other news, water is wet. I hate having to face him twice a year. Taco Charlton was waived by the Dolphins. Nothing to talk about there. David Njoku had his option exercised. And this one threw me for a loop. Njoku is a good player, but he's not great. He only played 4 games last year, and then the Browns signed Austin Hooper. Didn't you get the sense that the Browns were going to move on from Njoku? Look, he's a good player. He's just not great. And when you throw that much money at Austin Hooper, you've got to allocate your resources better. You want to tell me you want a 2 tight end setup? Alright, but just save the money and draft someone a little later. Spending the money that you're going to need to spend on Njoku is weird. Really bad decision by the Browns. TJ Watt had his option exercised. He was one of the best defensive players in the NFL last year. That's an absolute no-brainer. Reuben Foster, I'm stunned how his career ended up. This is a guy who came into the NFL with so much promise. I remember loving him out of Alabama. And in his rookie year, he was great. Pro Football Focus gave him a grade of 90.7. But after that, he just kept getting in trouble. Whether it was weapons or drugs or domestic violence, he just couldn't keep his head screwed on straight. It's such a shame. He had so much talent, so much potential. He could have been great. He really could have. I really hope he cleans up his act in D.C. This is his last chance. If Ron Rivera can't fix him, no one can. The last first rounder in 2017 was Ryan Ramczyk. This guy has gotten better and better every year he's been in the NFL. Massively underrated, as all great offensive linemen are. No-brainer to exercise his option. Okay. On to Don Shula. Without question, one of the smartest minds in football history. This guy forgot more about football than you and I will ever know. He started his NFL career as a player, was drafted by the Browns in the 9th round in 1951. And he bounced around a few teams, Browns, Colts, Redskins. He was a good player, was never great. He did intercept 21 passes in 73 games. That's pretty good. But from all accounts, he was just a good player, not great. After leaving the NFL for a little bit to coach in college, Shula made it back to the NFL as defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. Those Lions teams of the early 60s were really, really good. While they never made the playoffs, they never finished with more than 5 losses. And they always finished with a winning record. And Shula coached one of the most underrated defensive lines in NFL history. A line that earned the nickname the Fearsome Foursome. Yeah, that's right. The LA Rams with Rosie Greer, Lamar Lundy, Merlin Olsen, and Deacon Jones didn't invent it. These guys didn't either, but let me tell you, these guys were really good. Roger Brown, Alex Karras, who just got into the Hall of Fame, Darius McCord, and Sam Williams were insanely dominant. In 1963, Shula took over as head coach of the Colts. Weeb Ewbank had run his course there. He wasn't getting along with Carroll Rosenblum. Rosenblum was a tough guy to get along with. He can wear on you very quickly. But him and Shula got along. And very quickly, in Shula's second year, the Colts made the playoffs after missing the playoffs for the previous 4 seasons. Let me tell you, those mid to late 60s Colts teams are some of the best teams in NFL history to never win a Super Bowl or an NFL championship, whatever. Johnny Unitas, Lenny Moore, Gino Marchetti, Raymond Berry, John Mackey, Bobby Boyd, Jimmy Orr. I mean, some of the most dominant players of their era. They were just never able to get over the hump. In the 1964 NFL championship game, they were humiliated by the Browns. They couldn't get anything going. They lost 27-0. In the divisional round the year after, 1965. Yeah, I understand that Shula was playing without Unitas and the usual backup, Gary Cuozzo. But, I mean, that game went into overtime. The Colts had every opportunity to win that game, but they didn't. And it took them a while to get back to the mountaintop. Even though in 1967 they were incredibly dominant, went 11-1-2. Shula even won Coach of the Year that year, and Unitas won MVP. But because of a crazy tiebreaker, the Rams made the playoffs, and the Colts didn't. The year after that, though, the Colts made the Super Bowl as the best team in the NFL. Because of that, they earned the right to play the New York Jets in Super Bowl III. A game that the Colts were favored to win by 18 points. Of course, we all know that the Jets won, and that really spelled the end of his Colts tenure. He went 8-5-1 his last year there. And it became kind of apparent that his message had grown stale. While he was a great regular season coach, was a bad postseason coach. He went 2-3 as Colts head coach in the postseason. And there were a lot of people saying that this guy would never win a Super Bowl. And those people looked pretty smart when, after Shula left the Colts, Super Bowl V, Don McCafferty comes in, leads the Colts to an 11-2-1 record, and they win Super Bowl V 16-13 over the Cowboys. But Shula wasn't done coaching. The owner of the Dolphins was a man by the name of Joe Robbie, hence the name Joe Robbie Stadium. He signed Shula to a contract. The Dolphins were actually found guilty of tampering and had to give the Colts a first-round pick, similar to what happened with Belichick and the Jets and Patriots. But you know what? That first-rounder was well worth it. Because just 3 years after taking over as the head coach of the Dolphins, Shula orchestrated the best season in NFL history. The perfect season. 17-0. The most points they ever gave up in a game that season was 24. We all know how great that offense was with Bob Greasy, who's a terrible person, but that's another story for another day. Larry Little, Jim Langer, Bob Kuchenberg, Larry Zonka, Jim Kick, Mercury Morris, Earl Morrow, Paul Warfield, Howard Twilley, Jim Mandich, Garo Yepremian was a good kicker, Jake Scott, Lloyd Mumford, Dick Anderson, Nick Buonicotti, really nice guy, Doug Swift, Tim Foley, Curtis Johnson, and Manny Fernandez were some of the best players of their era. I don't know how they got the nickname No Name Defense. And they combined for the best season in NFL history. It's not 18-1. The Giants ruined that. The Patriots would have had the best season in NFL history if the Giants didn't beat them, but they did. So that record still belongs to the Dolphins. And what everyone forgets about the perfect season is the year after that, 1973, the Dolphins went back and won the Super Bowl. They weren't done winning. They blew out the Vikings 24-7 in Super Bowl VIII. The best thing about Don Shula was his ability to change his coaching style to best suit his team. That is what the best coaches do. They don't just expect everyone to fall in line into a cookie-cutter mold. They change their system to best suit their roster. As great as Bob Greasy was, and he was great, not a nice person, but a great quarterback, he wasn't the kind of guy who could win you games by himself. He needed help. And he had that in great running backs and great offensive linemen. I mentioned them earlier. I'm not going to mention them again. After Super Bowl VIII, Shula went back to disappointing in the playoffs. In 74, he lost an absolutely heartbreaking game to the Raiders where Ken Stabler completed one of the most improbable passes you'll ever see in your life to Clarence Davis to win that game. That started an 8-year stretch where Shula wouldn't win a playoff game. But in 1982, in the strike-shortened season, the Dolphins were able to capitalize. They made it to the Super Bowl and ended up losing to the Washington Redskins. As a result, the Dolphins ended up with the penultimate pick in the first round, 27 overall. It was pretty apparent by this point that the Dolphins needed a better quarterback. The quarterback that bridged the gap from Greasy to Marino was David Woodley. David Woodley was not a good quarterback. And the Dolphins found a pretty darn good quarterback in the 83 draft. After players like Todd Blackledge, Tony Eason, and Ken O'Brien were picked, the Dolphins selected Daniel Constantine Marino. This was a guy who fell because his college team, the Pittsburgh Panthers, had a terrible season. The record does lie in that case. Marino threw 17 touchdowns to 23 interceptions. And in their bowl game that year, the Cotton Bowl, they only mustered 3 points. They were a bad team. But the year before that, Marino showed how great he could be, as he threw for 37 touchdowns, helped lead the Panthers to an 11-1 record, and helped win the Sugar Bowl for the Panthers. Another knock on him was his supposed drug use. There was a rumor that it was a plant by Art Rooney to land Marino to the Steelers. Pittsburgh Panthers to Pittsburgh Steelers. That didn't happen. The Steelers ended up taking Gabriel Rivera. Senor Sack would have had a great career, but he suffered a terrible injury early in his career, a Dennis Byrd type injury. So Marino went to the Dolphins. And it's funny, if you've ever watched the clip of Marino being picked, the draft pundit that they had, the guy before Kuiper, I don't remember who it was, but he said the words, and I quote, "I really don't understand it. Who's the quarterback whisperer there? Who's going to teach him?" Well, I'll tell you who's going to teach him, dummy. Don Shula! Shula was the perfect coach for Marino. The two of them clicked. The two of them were inseparable. There's a reason that Marino underperformed when Jimmy Johnson took over for Shula. It's because Don Shula was the perfect coach for Dan Marino. And in just Marino's second year, 1984, he puts together one of the best seasons in NFL history. Throws for over 5,000 yards and 48 touchdowns. Records that would stand for 30 years. Unfortunately, that was the closest that Marino and Shula would ever come to a Super Bowl. The Niners destroyed them in Super Bowl 19, 38-16. And after that, they were never able to win that last game of the season. They never even made it back to the Super Bowl. They made it to the AFC title game twice. In 1986, when Tony Eason, a guy who was picked ahead of Marino, beat him and was much better than Marino in that game. Marino threw 2 picks. Eason, while he only attempted 12 passes, completed 10 of them. 3 of them were for touchdowns. Their rushing attack was unstoppable in that game. And then fast forward to 1992, when the Bills beat them en route to losing once again in the Super Bowl. That was the third of their 4 straight Super Bowl losses, for whatever it's worth. The first one to the Cowboys. After that, the message got stale. Shula retired after the 95 season. Like I said, Jimmy Johnson took over for him. Johnson was no better, as in Dan Marino's last ever game, he got destroyed by the Jaguars 62-7. I'm not joking. 62-7. The first pass that Dan Marino completed in that game took place with 10 minutes and 48 seconds to go in the second quarter. It was without question the worst game of Marino's career. It was a terrible end to a great career. And it's a shame that Marino couldn't get over the hump. But neither could Shula. And he had some great moments. The fake spike is legendary. Whenever they show it, I cringe as a Jets fan. But I'll tell you, it's such a shame that Shula couldn't win just one championship with Marino. If you want to call that a black mark, you can. But I'll tell you, this guy was one of the best coaches in NFL history. He is the all-time leader in wins by a coach, regular season and postseason combined, with 347. He's coached in the most games, 526. He also coached for 33 straight seasons. Belichick has a ways to go before he gets to that point. Remember, Belichick went from the Browns to the Jets to the Patriots, and he wasn't head coach of the Jets, as we all know. In retirement, he licensed his name to a chain of steakhouses, Shula Steakhouse. It still exists, actually, and it's kind of funny. I used to go there a lot because their New York City location was 270 West 43rd Street. For those of you who don't know New York City geography, that's pretty darn close to Times Square. That's pretty close to a lot of Broadway theaters. It's 43rd and 8th, to give you a better idea. I went there a lot, and I liked it. Good food, good decor, service was good. I liked it. I was sad when it closed. It still exists in Florida, though, and some other states. I met Shula once at a card show when Bob Greasy was there and was a jerk to me as a little kid. I'm a little kid, I'm wearing a Jet sweater, and Greasy's ripping on me. I mean, come on. It wasn't like good-natured ripping either. It was mean, it was callous. But Shula was really nice to me. Posed for a picture and everything. If memory serves, he let me wear one of his Super Bowl rings. Really, really class act. A gem of a man. May he rest in peace. Alright, the last story that I want to talk about today is Andy Dalton signing with the Cowboys. And that's going to be it. There were other stories that I was going to get to, but this show is running long enough. Dalton signing with the Cowboys caught a lot of people by surprise. There were some people saying that he was going to push Dak Prescott aside as starting quarterback of the Cowboys. Are you nuts? That's not why Dalton signed. Dalton signed because the Cowboys needed a backup. Their depth chart at quarterback before Dalton was Prescott, Cooper Rush, Clayton Thorson, and Ben DiNucci. That's not good. They needed a much better backup. And Dalton now becomes one of the best backups in the NFL. I'm stunned that the Patriots didn't go harder for him. There were rumors linking him to the Jets. He'd have made a ton of sense. Let James Morgan marinate as the third stringer, long-term number 2. If Darnold struggles, you can go to Dalton and you won't miss much. Now, I'm fine with Morgan as the backup. I think he'll be fine, but Dalton would have been really good. This makes perfect sense for the Cowboys. You want to tell me that they should have paid Prescott before they paid Dalton? Yeah, the optics aren't the best there, but it really doesn't matter much in the grand scheme of things. This is a really, really good move for the Cowboys. Tomorrow, you're probably going to get the trifecta, along with the latest sports news. You know the drill, you're a good listener. No deaths, though. I know that this is a slow time for sports news, but no deaths. Please. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that I never realized how short a month is until I started paying alimony.